right, so I kind of have been putting off filming this video because I'm kind of in a weird emotional space about cancer right now, which is probably an understatement. I mean, I don't know if there's a right or correct emotional space about cancer, but I think that it's time to finally just not worry about it and sit down and let you all know how my 6 rounds of TCHP chemotherapy actually went for me this summer. For those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Sarah. I usually make knitting, spinning, crafting, yarn-related content here on YouTube. This is probably given away by my large wall of yarn behind me. But in March of this year, I found out that I have breast cancer. And since watching other people share their stories about cancer was helpful to me early on and continues to be so, I thought that I would go ahead and share my story on my YouTube channel as well. So if you're here for the knitting and yarn content, today is unfortunately just a cancer video. But if you've found my channel looking for a cancer-related video, maybe stick around and see some of the knitting, spinning, crafting that I'm up to here as well. I say that I'm in a weird sort of emotional space about my cancer right now, and that's because I'm kind of existing in an in-between place. I have finished my chemotherapy and I haven't had my surgery yet, and so there's just a lot of space in your head to stress and worry and wonder about the cancer that is still left in you. So the purpose of today's video is to just go through what my experience with my 6 rounds of TCHP chemotherapy was, just in case that might be helpful to someone else who is maybe looking at starting chemotherapy, who's currently in the middle of it, for family and friends and caregivers of people experiencing chemotherapy. To bring everyone up to speed, you can either check out some videos I have linked below where I go over my cancer diagnosis and where I go specifically into what my chemotherapy regimen will look like. But in short, I found out that I have cancer in March. Biopsy confirmed that it was hormone receptor negative, so estrogen receptor, progesterone receptor negative, but HER2 positive driven breast cancer. Specifically, they staged it at around 2B. As a result, my surgeon and my oncologist decided that the best course of treatment for me would be what's called neoadjuvant chemotherapy. That just means that adjuvant in addition to surgery, neo coming before, so I would receive my chemotherapy prior to my surgery to remove what would hopefully be cancer-free breast tissue, but what would more likely be what's remaining of the tumor after the chemotherapy. My neoadjuvant chemotherapy regimen looked like 6 rounds of what was called TCHP chemotherapy. Now, chemotherapy regimens are going to vary dramatically from type of cancer to type of cancer, but also within breast cancer, depending on your staging, your hormone receptor status, your HER2 positive plus or minus, probably a lot of other things that I don't know specifically. There's going to be a wide range of different chemotherapy regimens that a person can be put on. Mine specifically, TCHP, or sometimes you would just see it as TCH, depending on how many of those last 2 drugs you're getting, seems to be a fairly standard regimen, especially for hormone negative, HER2 positive breast cancer. The T in the TCHP stands for a taxane drug. The C is a platinum drug, and then the H and the P are specific to my type of cancers, the HER2 positive cancers, because they are both antibody drugs to that HER2 receptor that is driving my cancer's growth. They are specifically Herceptin and Perjeta. Sorry, my microphone died, so I recorded a good 20 minutes of footage with no audio. So I went ahead and edited what I had so far and thought I would come back to it holding my camera. Maybe it feels more intimate, to redo what I lost to the old microphone. So where I left off is my chemotherapy is TCHP chemo, and I completed 6 rounds of it this summer. So the first sort of thing to sort of define, or where my expectations and my reality kind of varied, were what a round of chemotherapy is. So I knew I would be going for a single day of transfusion every 3 weeks, and I would do 6 of those total. So to me, initially, one round of chemotherapy just being one day of receiving drugs, the term round didn't feel appropriate. Um, and that's how I felt right up until about the Monday after my treatment. So I did all my treatments on Saturdays. And when those symptoms really kick in that first Monday, you realize why it's around, even if you're getting your drugs all in one day as opposed to spread out. Um, Certainly, some chemotherapy treatments involve multiple days of transfusions, like going in for multiple appointments, or it's transfusions in combination with drugs to take it home. For me, it was just the one day, but the round really is all of the symptoms in recovery that come as a result of that day of transfusion. Which is why when people would congratulate you after a transfusion day of, hooray, you're done round 4, I would always come back with, nope, I'll be done round 4 in 3 weeks when I'm ready to go for round 5. And when I have recovered to the best of my ability from round 4. Anywho, round 1 started on April 29th, and I went every 3 weeks for transfusion and completed my last transfusion on August 12th, which means to me, I finished round 6 on September 2nd. Now, I was lucky enough to have my parents come and stay with us this summer, so they were able to help take care of my kids, not only on transfusion days, but also as I recovered from chemotherapy, which meant, of course, that my husband was able to come with me for each of my transfusion days. Editing Sarah here. I keep saying transfusion. Transfusion is blood and blood products. I mean infusion, because I never received any blood or blood products. But my, I guess we'll call it chemo brain, decided that that's the word that I want to use for treatment days. So just to clarify, was not actually receiving blood or blood products. Not that I'm opposed to them, just never got to the point where I needed them. So I want to describe a little of what the transfusion day looked like for me. We live up in Olds in central Alberta, and my transfusions took place at the Tom Baker Cancer Center in Calgary, which it's about an hour and 15-minute drive for us. So we would drive down in the morning along the back highways. I would be feeling great because I would have taken some steroids, like an oral corticosteroid, the day before, the morning of. I would have taken an anti-nausea drug, Zofran, the morning of before my treatment. So I felt energized and just eager, especially that first one. That first one, you really want to get started because you want to start fighting your cancer, right? So heading down to treatment felt great. Now I would be receiving 4 drugs, and the first transfusion day took at least 6 hours, because when you first receive a drug, they want to transfuse it into you slowly, and then they want to do an hour-long observation window in case you're going to have an adverse reaction, and then go to the next drug slowly again over the course of an hour, and then an observation window, and then slowly, and so the first day took forever. In addition, the first 2 rounds of chemotherapy I received through an IV in my arm. But then because I will be going for treatment every 3 weeks for almost a year total, my oncologist decided that a port would definitely be a good investment. So you can kind of see I've got that little incision here. Underneath my skin here is my port. What that looks like is sort of like a little triangular medical device, kind of like a button. It's got a membrane on it that can be pierced with a needle, and that will heal when you pull the needle out. And it's got a tube catheter coming out of the port. It runs underneath my skin, and then you can see this little scar here. That's where that tube, and you can feel the tube under the skin, goes into a vein in my neck, and it's sent down the lumen, the interior of that vein, right to the opening of the ventricles of your heart, although it would be an atria, but right to your heart. And that way you can sort of bypass your smaller peripheral veins and deliver the drug directly to your central circulation right to your heart to be sent all over your body. And getting that port was very important and helpful. Chemotherapy drugs are incredibly toxic and they are very hard on your veins. I did 2 rounds of my transfusion through regular IVs. Um, and both times I had significant pain in the vein that they transfused through, both during the transfusion of the 4th drug, my carboplatin at the end of the day there, and as well as like extreme tenderness along that vein afterwards. One of the veins still has sort of like, I don't know if it's scar tissue. I don't know if you can see that little bump right there, right underneath my freckle. So like I've got like a hard spot in that vein from receiving chemotherapy through it. So do not recommend chemotherapy through the IV unless you only have to go for a couple. Plus the IV starts just tend to be more difficult. They have to pick a new vein each time because like my vein would not be recovered within 3 weeks to receive chemotherapy through it again. So the port protects your peripheral veins. It allows the drug to be, delivered right to your heart to be sent around your body. They also can transfuse the drugs faster through the port because it's a larger diameter vein, right? So you're not worried about destroying a vein. So port placement was appreciated. The accessing the port is supposed to be simple and quick and not require multiple jabs and IV starts. However, my port is kind of placed funny in there, and so last time I went, it took 4 tries to get that port accessed, which hopefully next time is better than that. Anyways, so transfusion, like 6 hours the first time, and then like 6 hours the second time. And then after that, they were able to start transfusing the drugs faster, and we progressively eliminated those observation windows. I was very lucky. I didn't have any real adverse reactions to any of my drugs. One time I got like, not a fever because I didn't pop a fever, but I had chills like you would get when you have a fever. So they decided to slow down the transfusion of that drug and give me, what did they give me? Oh, they gave me like an antihistamine, like an IV antihistamine, Benadryl, I think. And the chills resolved. And I mean, who's to say whether it was like really a reaction to the drug or just that you're getting cold IV fluids sent directly to your heart to, drop your core temperature a little bit. But I didn't have any serious adverse reactions during any of my treatments. Treatments were tolerated well during the transfusion. I will say that I did ice my hands and feet during the transfusion of the docetaxel, one of my drugs, which is a pain in the butt, but is worth it, I think. And I'll talk to that as I go through like chemo symptoms. So I did ice my hands and my feet, which is, it sucks, but you persevere, it's worth it. I did not obviously worry about cold caps. It's an option to potentially preserve some of your hair, which is essentially icing your scalp during treatment. And usually by the end of treatment, apart from having an incredibly full bladder from all of the drug that's been transfused into you, like it's all carried in fluid, right? And then they have to flush additional fluid into you in between each drugs. So apart from very full bladder and having to pee multiple times, sometimes on the side of the road on the way home, no real symptoms day of. Usually came home and took a nap, just because it's a long day of receiving medication, and for us, driving an hour and 15 minutes each way. But transfusion days were actually not bad. Around 5 and 6, I actually went out with friends or family for dinner afterwards. So, like, you can kind of go for your transfusion and go about your daily life. Day of. Yeah, so that's what transfusion looks like. Then for the rest of my symptoms, I'm going to sort of, as far as the best way to process my thoughts and ideas, I'm going to take from head to toes on the rest of my symptoms. So just to change things up and to alleviate the self-camera holding shaky cam, I've popped my phone into a tripod and come over here to do the head to toe on
the symptoms of chemotherapy that I experienced. So, starting at the top, obviously, I did lose my hair. I do have a video down below linked to my chemotherapy hair loss journey. Um, it's starting to come back in. You can see a little bit of peach fuzz up here. Hopefully, it starts to come back in thicker because I definitely miss my hair at this point. Um, so I will say that my oncologist and the lovely people of the internet all suggest that the chemotherapy hair loss begins around day sort of 14. And sure enough, that's when mine started to go significantly. Um, I don't think that the first round, like all of the hair went. I'd say that maybe like 20% held on after the first round, but it was significant enough that we buzzed it right off, anyways. I will also say that there was maybe about 5% of real stubborn hair follicles that refused to die. So we had to do repeated head shaving during, because just having these like sparse sprinkling of a couple of hairs holding on was not the look that I was going to go for. Um, and mostly I was okay with the hair loss. I only actually wore a wig out twice, and once was to the Barbie movie to wear like a blonde Barbie movie, like a blonde Barbie wig. So I don't know if that really counts. Mostly I wore these little chemo caps. They're just a little cotton slouchy beanie that I picked up on Amazon. So I wore those, and then I had sort of like a straw hat that I wore outside quite a bit because summertime and it's hot. And the hair loss didn't bother me too much initially because it felt, I don't know if appropriate is the right word, but it matched my expectations. And at the beginning you're in the thick of chemotherapy, and yeah, it matches. You're going for cancer treatment and your hair falls out. Um, and I still looked like me, but after round 5, I started finding that I was getting really bad bags under my eyes. I think my face felt a little puffy, or at least to me it did. My point is that after around 5, I started to not really recognize myself in the mirror. Like when I would look at my reflection, I got this like sense of that's not who I am. And I don't know if that's just how ill I was showing through, but I took it out on being really frustrated that I had no hair, and I'm so ready for the hair to grow back now. Um, as I've gotten better, like as I've started to recover more and more from chemotherapy, and I look like myself and I feel more like myself, that sense of frustration regarding the hair loss has alleviated. But I'm still more than ready to just have some hair again, even just like buzz cut hair. So yeah, hair loss. I did also, I don't know how much you can tell, camera is a little bit overexposed, but I did lose probably upwards of 60% of my eyebrow hair, as well as probably 50% of my eyelashes. Like I usually have quite a bit of eyelashes. Um, I still have some. Like some people lose completely all of their eyebrows and eyelashes. I retain some. I don't have any makeup on them. Sometimes I'll pencil them in and then wear mascara. Helps a little bit. But you miss the eyelashes though, because it seems like every little fleck of dust and allergen just really gets in your eyeballs. And then they watered constantly. But anyways, eyebrows, eyelashes, you lose all of your nose hairs, which you take those for granted. You don't realize that they're in there doing a job until you don't have them. And what that looked like for me is that um, every little bit of fluid that my sinus produced while I was during chemo, and even still now, just my nose ran constantly. Like not that you were sick with a cold, just like clear fluid. There's no hair in there to hold it in, and so your nose ran all the time. Hey, not that it's hair, but something that I forgot when I was filming yesterday, that's somewhat related because it's keratinous. Fingernails. I clearly did not lose mine. Some people do, in fact, lose their fingernails during chemotherapy. I was very nervous about this because after round 3, I started actually having sort of pain and tenderness in my fingernails that made me very worried that they would fall out. And I just thought, like, just please give me this. And so far, so good. I do, interestingly, though, have little ridges that you can see. It's like you can track each round of chemo as my nails grew. So luckily kept my fingernails. Also with my nose, I got nosebleeds. So chemotherapy is really hard on the membranous structures of your body because those cells divide rapidly and chemotherapy kills rapidly dividing cells. And so I had just a good 2 weeks, after each chemotherapy, I would have spontaneous nosebleed. So again, needed to have tissue with you all the time. That was helped out by generous application of Vaseline inside my nose, especially when I was sleeping at night, and sleeping with a humidifier on was very helpful for that as well. Coming down my face. Oh, we missed them. I think I forgot to talk about this the first time I recorded before my mic gave up. Bizarrely, I had bad, it wasn't tinnitus, but it was like your ears were extra sensitive to background sounds. And as a result, your ears got, like I had ear pain. And the thing that was very helpful to that was just wearing earplugs. And I found that the ear pain, like, it was definitely like, it's like your ears got fatigued over the course of the day and then you had a headache in your ears, if that makes any sense. And just wearing earplugs to kind of dampen the background sounds out was incredibly helpful. Talking about my brain, you might hear the term like chemo brain fog. And I mean, I don't know how much that's affected my day to day cognitive processing, but I would say that by Sunday night after receiving treatment on Saturday, and then lasting for about 48 hours, I had like a literal fog. Like it was hard to focus on anything that would be further than like a meter away from my body. Like visually, it seemed like, it felt like you're not wearing your glasses and then you go to put your glasses on and it doesn't even help with like the literal visual fog. It was hard to focus on conversation with people that were sort of outside. It's like you had this just like this was your bubble of existence and nothing could penetrate into it. You felt very alone and isolated in it. And also, you didn't feel like yourself in it either. So it was just a really disconcerting feeling of isolation and fogginess, and at the same time, not feeling grounded in yourself at all either. And that would last for a good 48 hours at the beginning of chemo. Other than that, I don't think I experienced too much sort of like neurological symptoms. Coming down my body is my mouth. Chemotherapy does wonders on your mouth. So I would go for transfusion on Saturday, and by Monday, everything tasted like metal, like absolutely everything. Food tasted like metal, water tasted like metal, your own saliva tasted like metal, and like strongly enough that it made it really difficult to drink water. The things that helped to get fluids in then were to have it ice cold, so it had to be like iced water. Um, or I was drinking a fair bit of the purple G2 Gatorade, but not just as is. I would blend it with a whole bunch of ice, so it was like a slushy of the G2 Gatorade. And that seemed to be a little bit easier to get down in those first couple days when the metallic taste was so strong that like it was like nauseating to try and like drink water or drink fluids through that metallic taste. In addition, so the metallic taste would usually have resolved by the end of a week, and I might get a day or two right around that 1 week mark where food tasted like normal again and my mouth wasn't full of mouth sores before the mouth sores would start. And some people get them certainly way worse than I do. I found I was getting like canker sores anywhere where my teeth were sort of rubbing against the inside of my cheeks. And they were sore enough that opening your mouth wide was super painful. Obviously chewing food and like having like acidic food touch them was super painful. I didn't get any sort of towards the front. They were all sort of like where your molars kind of are, rubbing against your cheeks, especially when you're sleeping at night. And then like the taste buds, sort of the little bumps on your tongue, those all kind of got like you look at your tongue and half of them would be like swollen and weird, and sometimes they got really kind of swollen and weird. So that was a bit weird. But yeah, so you got like a week of metallic taste, maybe a window of 2 days where food was normal, and then I had mouth sores that would last for the next week. Yeah, mouth not fun, lingered, throws your appetite right off. So throughout all of chemo, I had these really intense cravings that were non-specific cravings. You were just craving for food to taste the way that it was supposed to be, for it to be enjoyable when you eat it, craving just something crunchy. Like my mouth was so sensitive that you wanted to like shove a handful of crunchy chips in your mouth, but you knew it would just hurt so much that it wasn't worth it. um yeah, just that non-specific craving. And I spent a lot of time, I don't know if it helped or hurt with the non-specific craving, but like scrolling through TikTok, just like looking at delicious food and watching people cook potatoes and wanting like delicious, greasy, amazing food. So it was like sexual frustration, but not sexual frustration, like hunger frustration is how I would describe your appetite during chemotherapy. As far as nausea, um, so my history with nausea is that I get super nauseous. I get motion sick in vehicles. I can't handle even the tiniest bit of opioid type drugs because they just make me vomit. Um, like I throw up very, very easily, get nauseous very, very easily. So going into chemotherapy, my husband and I thought for sure that it would be like every depiction of cancer in media ever, that I would be hugging that toilet, vomiting all the time. In fact, I only threw up one time throughout all 6 rounds of chemo. Um, Turns out that it's not sort of the motion nausea that I get. It's more of a discomfort of the stomach. It's like a stomach based nausea. And for me, the Zofran, I believe, is the drug. They prescribed a couple of anti-nauseant drugs, and the anti-nauseant drugs for once in my life actually helped with the nausea. So it wasn't an issue on that end. For me, it was the diarrhea. And it's one of those things where, like, all of a sudden I feel super uncomfortable to talk about that, but it was a very real symptom. It was predictably would have an onset on Tuesday, um, where it would show up sometime Tuesday afternoon. And I don't want to go into too much detail about it because it's gross, it's not fun, but it was horrible. The worst I've ever experienced in my life. It was something that before each round of chemotherapy, I cried that I didn't want to have to go through it again. I actually ended up in hospital, as a result of the first chemo induced round of diarrhea. I subsequently got an infection of my GI tract, which led to even more one time. So had to go into hospital for IV antibiotics for that, which was not pleasant. Yeah. So moral of the story is that was for me the worst symptom by far. Um, and thankfully, hopefully, I am past that stage in my treatment because it was something. And like you also just had days too where you couldn't fathom being, more than 10 minutes away from your bathroom because you just would be going about your normal life and you'd feel this feeling inside of you, and then you were back in the bathroom for like 5 hours. So yeah. Um, the toilet troubles, if you will, were definitely the worst, most intolerable symptom of my chemotherapy. And it's a terrible black evil memory that I would like to repress for the rest of my life now. So let's talk skin. The very first round of chemo, I broke out into what some people call chemo acne, like little teeny tiny pimples all down the bottom of my face, all down my neck, all across my chest. But then after the first round, never had any real significant problems with that. In fact, my skin has been throughout chemo better than it ever has been in my life. I tend to get, I think they call it like keratinitis pilaris, like really like these little bumplies all over my arms. Um, Resolved completely thanks to chemotherapy. Turns out having, cell division in your skin shut down for a bit, um, makes for really soft baby-like skin. Um, so I don't know if that'll persist long term. I doubt it. But yeah, apart from some of what they might call chemo acne, just in the first round, after that, my skin was great for the rest of chemotherapy. Like sometimes dry because I got fairly dehydrated. Um, but skin, who would have thought? silver lining, right? Continuing to move down my body, and I think it this way because of my sort of joint pain. Sort of bone aches and joint pain can be a side effect from your chemotherapy. They can be a side effect from one of the drugs that I was taking in order to boost my immune system during chemotherapy. And I felt like medium achy, but not too bad. I don't think that I really remember a couple times taking maybe Advil or Tylenol because I felt really sore and achy, but it wasn't a memorable symptom, or maybe when that was happening just coincided with other worser symptoms that had me more upset. Um yeah, so joint pain not too bad. Oh, we skipped kidneys. So I found that um I guess because your body knows it's been poisoned with all these drugs, and they can be hard on and damaging to your kidneys too. But I found that from Sunday night all day Monday into Tuesday morning, I diuresed like crazy. Which is to say that my kidneys were shunting fluid out of my body, and you had to pee all of your fluids out. Like not only did you have metallic taste and nausea and brain fog that didn't make you want to drink water, um, but my body diuresed like crazy for like a 24-hour window each round of chemotherapy. Um, that was really hard, if not impossible, to keep on top of. You would try and drink fluids, but it seemed like you would have, this much of fluids that you would swallow down, and then you would go to the bathroom and pee out like 2 liters of pee. So that was a struggle. I did end up having to go into hospital, not to be admitted, but we went into the emerge twice, I believe, just to get IV fluids run, because I dehydrated just to the point of being physically weak and being physically ill. So if I could go back and do it again, I would definitely have like a standing IV fluid hydration appointment 2 or 3 days after chemotherapy. Um, but it was a struggle, and you had to try your hardest to persevere through. Um, Two more symptoms to talk about. One is oh no, three more symptoms to talk about. So, each round of chemotherapy, I had to go for blood work beforehand to sort of check your levels of everything basically. I found that my magnesium dropped stepwise each time, which my doctor wasn't too concerned about. My hemoglobin, my red blood cell count, dropped stepwise each time. It did plateau off towards the end, like around 5 and 6 there. It kind of reached a low and stayed at it. Again, my oncologist wasn't too concerned about the red blood cells. She said if it gets too low, we just give you a blood transfusion and then you're fine again. For me, the effect though was that I was anemic. And you felt it. You felt it in your inability to carry oxygen around through your body. And I think my plan in my head is to do another video down the road depicting my data from my Garmin on my fitness levels, on my VO2 max, on my rest, on I did the same 2 kilometer walk or run, a couple times a week throughout all of chemotherapy, and how that my performance at that decreased, and matching that up with some of my blood work data. But yeah, like the out of breathness was tough. And it got to the point where just like coming up a flight of stairs and you would be like out of breath, or just walking down to my greenhouse. And I'm not 100% recovered yet. I'm hoping that I will eventually be, and I am actively trying to get back to the level of physical fitness that I am accustomed to. And who knows if that's just purely the anemia or if it's the whole combined effects of chemotherapy, probably the later. But I got more weak and fatigued with each round, like for sure. And just even noticeable in your daily life, like just walking with my husband and having to tell him to slow down because I can't keep up. So yeah, it really wears you down. The other blood count that we monitored throughout were my neutrophils. Those are a white blood cell that are critical in your your initial immune response. And because chemotherapy, again, kills dividing cells, it kills the cells that need to divide to become red blood cells. It kills the cells that need to divide to become white blood cells. And the neutrophils are the one that they are most concerned about because you can have a condition called neutropenia, which is to say that you have almost no neutrophils, which would mean that your initial line of response to any kind of infection is gone. And so you can go from not sick to septic incredibly quickly, which means that throughout my chemotherapy, we were on notice that anytime I got a fever, that required a trip to the emergency room to have my blood work checked. Because a fever, in addition to having no neutrophils, means that you are at, quite high risk actually of developing sepsis, and you need IV antibiotics until your neutrophils come back. There are drugs that you can take to promote or encourage your body to try harder to make neutrophils. And so for the first 5 rounds of chemo, I took one drug. So it was a 1 dose drug. So it was a needle that I would have my husband give me the day after chemotherapy, which is like a granulocyte, which is the class of blood cells that neutrophils are, stimulating factor. So it goes and it tells your bones in your spleen to work really, really hard to make as many neutrophils as you can. And that worked until round 5 when I had the hospitalization with the GI infection, because they checked my blood work and I think it was like 0.1 neutrophils, like basically zero. And so it was a guaranteed hospital admission and IV antibiotics, more granulocyte stimulating factor injections. And so then we were cautious going into round 6, didn't want to end up immunocompromised again and in hospital again. And so we switched from a version of that drug where I receive it one day to a version that you take, again, by a needle 5 days in a row on your lowest point in your neutrophils. And luckily, on round 6, that kept me out of hospital. And then the last symptom that I want to talk about, and the reason that I iced my hands and feet during transfusions, is peripheral neuropathy. So this is a condition that can occur during chemotherapy. I don't know if they're like really certain about the how and why about it, but it's inflammation and disease, I guess, of the nerves that innervate your hands and feet. And the symptoms can range from some people experience none, some people experience some light tingling or some numbness or some extra sensitivity to touch or hot or cold. Some people can have it be so bad that they have loss of function in their hands, that they're tripping and falling because their feet are that numb. And so one of the things that is often recommended is that when you're receiving in my case, it was the docetaxel, the taxane chemotherapy drug, that you ice your fingers, your hands, and your feet. All the icing does is it causes the blood vessels in your hands and feet to constrict in order to it's a response to cold. So initially the response to cold is to constrict and preserve your core temperature, right? So don't worry about sending blood to your fingers. Let's keep your core warm. So ice hands and feet to constrict those blood vessels. If they're constricted, then they will receive less of a dose of the chemotherapy that is circulating through your body. And that will hopefully, and there are some studies that suggest that this is the case. You can also have the same effect achieved by wearing really, really tight gloves, because that physically will like squeeze down your blood vessels and restrict blood flow. So yeah, there are some studies that show that it's effective, certainly enough to convince me that it was worth the discomfort of icing your hands and feet for an hour. All that being said, though, I do still have some neuropathy. It seemed to get a little bit worse each time. It also seemed, especially in my feet, to get really bad around maybe day 5 and then progressively get better. But there's definitely, like, my fingertips feel both numb and hypersensitive. I don't know if that makes any sense. And it's the same with my feet. My feet feel both numb and hypersensitive. And the way I described it to my husband and the way I'll describe it to you is if you've ever had um, like freezing, so like dental freezing, or if you needed stitches and they gave you lidocaine, that feeling as the freezing first starts to wear off, where you're still numb from the freezing, but you've got this tingly, like your brain is also hyper focused on that area as the sense, like as the freezing wears off. And so it's in my fingertips. Just, even doing this, like it doesn't feel right. There's definitely a wrongness to the way my fingertips feel. I notice that prior to all of this, I like to recycle wool from like yarn from sweaters. And prior to all this, I could just sort of feel and determine basically immediately if it was wool fiber or synthetic fiber. And the sensitivity is not as good in my fingertips. And then like weird things, like if you needed to twist the lid off of, say, like a bottle of pop, those little ridges in the lid on my fingers, it just becomes incredibly painful. So it's like you're numb, but you're also hypersensitive. At least for me, that's how it's played out. And so I can do it, but it's really uncomfortable. So I've like been getting my husband to open containers for me. Like if someone's around, it's just like, hey, can you twist open this milk jug? A task which I should definitely be capable of doing, but my fingers feel really messed up, so I can't right now. And then my feet are not numb enough to impair movement or walking or anything like that. But again, it's like a combination of like numbness and hypersensitivity. And the feet bother me most as soon as you go to get into bed at night. And it's like your feet feel cold and numb, but also like every time the sheet moves across them, it's like the most sensitive that they could be. And so even though I never in my whole life like to wear socks to bed, I started wearing socks to bed because then at least the sock would be like a consistent feeling and not every time the sheet moved against your feet. Um, the neuropathy, it's like a maybe it resolves, maybe it doesn't sort of scenario. And I mean, if you know me, I have definitely been into the literature on this. So as far as I'm concerned, though, um, is it desirable? Not at all. Is it bad enough that it's going to deter me from living my life the way that I want to live my life? No, I mean, there are worse things in the world than having some discomfort when you need to open a jug of milk, right? And so, as long as the neuropathy stays at the level that I have, then, the little bit of loss of function in my fingertips, um, it's a trade-off to being cancer free, right? So we know that chemotherapy drugs have side effects, and sometimes those side effects can last for the rest of your life. But that's the trade-off of having the rest of your life to enjoy. So this video turned out much longer than I thought. I am sure and certain that there are things that I will immediately, upon turning the camera off, realize I forgot to talk about.
Sorry, side effect is hot flashes.
But I just really wanted to get my experience with chemotherapy down out there for you guys, in case this is helpful. And if it's not helpful for anyone, and if no one watched to the end of the video, that's fine too. Then we'll call it just a journal for me, so that if I ever feel the need to go back to this place, although like I said, I'm happy to repress all of the negatives of chemotherapy for the rest of my life. But yeah, so it was a trip. It wasn't the worst. Like, it was a crappy summer. It could have been a lot worse. I'm grateful that for every 3-week round of chemotherapy, I usually had a week of feeling normal and like not normal, but feeling like I could do my normal day-to-day things. So I'm grateful for that. Some people react much worse and they don't get any comfort or normalcy, or their reactions are bad enough that they can't complete their 6 rounds of chemo. So I'm very grateful that for me, it sucked, but it was tolerable. And I guess that's kind of all you can ask for when it comes to chemotherapy. Anyhow, I'm gonna sign this video off now. Thanks for watching. If you made it to the end, let me know in the comments below. I'll be curious to see. But yeah, I hope that this was helpful for someone and not just me rambling into a camera for what looks like it's going to be about an hour-long video. That's all I got. Bye for now.